Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz, and this season we will be unpacking real trends, hot topics in the workplace around allyship and inclusion. Our goal is that each week you leave with tangible tools, information, practical strategies that you can take back to allies at your organization. Let's dig in to this week's topic. With the Supreme Court's ruling, SCOTUS here in the US, late June about affirmative action, a lot of organizations are really confused about what this means for them and their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So let's dispel a couple myths right up front. One, the ruling was specifically to higher ed about having racial criteria involved in the selection process of candidates for higher ed. So it does not have any bearing on corporate. But as you can imagine, a lot of corporations are thinking, well, this is probably what's coming next. It'll be challenged legally in corporate settings, which may or may not happen. We've seen a few rumblings, but not a lot of activity legally around corporate DEI programs. So, one, you're absolutely safe to continue your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Two, the second piece is that this does have a negative future impact on the workplace because we know affirmative action programs have been successful in increasing the representation, specifically of folks of color, in positions where they were not 50 years ago. And so this does potentially take away from some really effective legislation that's now being challenged. So this could definitely impact pipeline. And I think the implication for companies, especially if college degrees are a part of your selection process, would ask yourself, are college degrees absolutely necessary to do the roles at our organization? And if you've hired someone without a college degree that has done the job successfully, the answer is probably not. And two, what are you doing to diversify your pipeline? Are you going to HBCUs, historically Black colleges or universities, for example? Are you engaging in communities that may not have that direct pipeline, that access, because the cost of college education has gone up tremendously, and there is a financial barrier for folks of marginalized backgrounds, especially to advance. So, one of the other interesting implications might be that colleges and universities that are really focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, because they want to reflect the communities of which they hope to serve, which is a good thing, is they may start looking at financial information, finance information, which can also be highly correlated, sadly, with communities of color. Race and class do have some profound intersections in society still today and are somewhat deepening as well. So there's other opportunities at the university level. I think we have to be more creative about our talent strategies as a result of this. And absolutely now is not the time to pause on DEI efforts. So one of the things I wrestle with is that people don't seem to understand what affirmative action is. So this is the challenge, is thinking about what it is, what it isn't. And so this is problematic because younger generations are increasingly more diverse. And so this lack of representation that we may have when we lose more students of color at the university level is a disconnect. We're going to have a disconnect between the actual population and the employment that our organizations hope to reflect to the communities they hope to serve. And it's interesting because only 36% of Americans perceive affirmative action positively. About the same percentage perceives it negatively, and then there's a broad swath of folks in the middle that just really have common misunderstandings about what it is, what isn't, and sadly, can't really decide if it's a good or bad thing. But we do know some of the misperceptions. One, legacy admissions or other forms of privilege are affirmative action. So legacy admissions are really, this is preferences towards alumni connections or students of alumni. And so this increases the prospective student's odds of admission to college just because the applicant is related to an alumnus. It's usually a parent or grandparent. It's sometimes a donor that we know private colleges rely heavily on donor contributions, especially Ivy League schools that are tend to be very highly regarded. So we know there's other disadvantages when property taxes directly impact the impact on investment and education. Students from wealthier, often whiter school districts have access to more resources. So other forms of privilege, standardized testing, prep tutors, mentoring, work study opportunities, strong athletic programs. This is all more likely to be in wealthier communities that are more white dominated. So there is affirmative action that is already happening in the form of legacy admissions and other privileges because of property taxes. And then another piece is white children benefit from affirmative action too. This is not a zero-sum game. And I just absolutely love what Michelle Obama put, her viral online reaction to the recent ruling, is it wasn't just the kids of color who benefited. Every student heard a perspective they might not have encountered, who had an assumption challenge, who had their minds and hearts opened. They benefited as well. Just love that. Love her leadership and taking the high road on these challenging times. But over 70% of white children live in white dominated communities. So the first chance a white child has to learn about kids of color oftentimes are in the college environment. And we're doing them a disservice if that's the first time they have a friend of color or they really get to know somebody from a different cultural background. So to limit their ability to meet other kids is really a disservice to future generations. And then the last piece that I would say about misunderstandings around affirmative action is, this whole notion that systemic racism is over. Um, it's very much not. The summer of 2020, while we did increase awareness, we have not grappled with the real issues that we have with the uh, prison system being, predominantly folks of color, the education system, of course, that we're talking about today, these healthcare outcomes, these are all disparities that we have that are very profound. And so, what I thought was interesting in digging into this on the education piece is that when you look back at higher ed in particular, from the day they were founded, a lot of these universities were founded in the late 1800s, right? Right. Think about what was happening. Yeah, Civil War, yeah, Reconstruction, and then Jim Crow laws and lynchings and very blatant forms of discrimination were very prominent back then. So the founding roots of these colleges and universities were pro-slavery. Money from the African slave trade financed institutions of higher ed. Many college campuses used enslaved folks to build their campuses. University scholars supported the ideology of white supremacy, and they actually did research to show the racial inferiority of African Americans, which is largely, obviously false. But coursework in history, religion, other subjects supported the moral and political correctness of slavery. We still see evidence of this today in Florida, for example. Passing legislation. It's very problematic. We have to be able to face that these are problems that need to be solved and not hide from our deeply problematic past. Legal segregation also prevented Black students from attending colleges. They had quota systems to limit Black attendance. So, just kind of interesting to think about how we started is still embedded in how we are today. And if we want to get better at this, well, the affirmative action decision may not be reversed in short order. I would say companies can get better making sure you're broadening your pipelines, you're being very strategic about how you address your DEI issues and deepening your commitment now, especially when it may not be the popular thing to do. And companies that stay brave during challenging times win long term because we know young folks care about these issues at the very time we're seeing withdrawal from some of these issues. So stay committed, allies, and we'll see you back next week. Thank you for listening to the Diversity Pivot podcast. My hope is that you walked away with a tangible tool, insight, or information that you can share with other allies on the journey. If you liked this week's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a tremendous amount to us. We'll be back next week with another hot topic.